senior he's the senior partner, and I'm still Korokoza, but it's okay. Please join me to welcome Vengai to the stage.
Good afternoon. The MC likes stories, and I suppose I have to follow suit. The only problem is an accent problem. I do not have the same accent, and accents are very important. I'll tell you a story. When I came here last week. Arrived in London, and I had to do a few business there. And then around Thursday, I was like, okay, I'll be in Birmingham this weekend. I need to make sure I've got a fresh cut for the audience in Birmingham. I got on the bus, I went to Lewisham for a barber, for obvious reasons. And got to Lewisham, was looking at, okay, a few barber shops. I saw this barber shop, seemed like a Jamaican guy. I got in the barber shop. I told him, my brother, I need a nice fresh haircut, but don't touch the top, because I'm 44 years old. I do not have a long relationship with my hair. I need to remain acquainted for as long as possible. And then he said something that was shocking. I was like, I'm sorry, I didn't understand what you just said. I don't speak Jamaican English. And then he said, I'm a trim. I was like, yes, you may trim, but not the top part. You can go this way. He says, no, man, I must trim, sit down. And for most part of that haircut, I was so scared. I didn't know what he was talking about. And he had tattoos and his hair was plaited, and I was being judgmental. And then he started playing gospel music. I got kind of sidetracked. I was like, you don't look like you play CC Wines. But it was, and I got a fresh cut, and here I am. So that being said, I secured my hair, and I'm supposed to talk to you. My assignment is about securing your legacy. And that being said, in terms of securing your legacy, if you don't understand what I'm saying because of the accent, if you take home anything, just take home, I'm a trim. I'm a trim. That's good enough for today. You can have the question and answer afterwards. So we're going to speak about securing your legacy. For those of us who are in Zimbabwe, that's our boy, is the late socialite. Didn't know him personally, but the whole country knew him. And I don't know if this is the back or the front of his yard. Young man, he used to enjoy his life. He probably lived a life that a lot of people emulate. It could be an outer ego or whatever it is. He acquired quite a handsome amount of money at a very young age. And unlike the other socialites, he actually had the assets. But we're going to talk about his legacy. And this comes from Neanda Radio. I say this so that the estate cannot sue me if I say the wrong things. I did not create this. This came from Neanda Radio. It says, almost 4 years after his untimely death, the once revered fleet of luxury vehicles has reportedly vanished. Just after 4 years. And he acquired more than 90% of this room would acquire in their lifetime. But 4 years later, for some reasons which will explore in my presentation, they reportedly vanished. I'm going to try not to be too legalistic in my presentation, so that at least we'll move along together. What does this teach us? This creates a serious problem. What we know from media and not as facts. So I understand these days if you're presenting, you have to say alleged, or what is alleged, etc., is that he wrote a will, but the will was never signed. It's alleged. It's also alleged that he built a multi-million-dollar house at his rural home. We'll discuss what that means from an ownership perspective. But then, before we go into this legacy thing, I'm a lawyer. I never take everything for granted. I do not even take for granted the fact that I know what legacy means. So we need to explore what is the definition of legacy. And in real estate, which we're going to be dealing with particularly, for me, we'll actually use the Oxford Language Dictionary so that they give us definitions and we don't take any definitions from me. It says that any amount of money or property left to someone in a will. I think that is a limited definition, but it also describes a person's legacy. And if we take that context and then we take the invalidity or validity of his will, we may then think that there was no legacy there, but we do not know for sure. But it gives two definitions, it doesn't give one definition. The next one will be the long-lasting impact of particular events, actions that took place in the past, or of a person's life. I'm still very confused, just as a side track, about where you put your commas. And I have a serious problem with my young lawyers, because I still don't believe you put a comma just before an end. That's what we were taught. I don't know if everybody was taught under the same system, or an or. You were taught under that system, eh? So whenever lawyers bring their work and I'm just reviewing them, I'm seeing all these things. And I have a serious problem with it, and I don't mind being ancient, or being considered to be ancient. So I always review, put red marks, ask questions, where did you go to school? You know, those kind of things. Ultimately, this is the definition, and by the below definition, we can then surmise that Genius Kadungure did leave a legacy, because 4 years later, somewhere in Birmingham, Vengai Madzima, who we never met, is speaking about him from the bottom part. Then we go to the reasons why we are here. And I'm hoping by the time I finish, just like my barber's haircut, all these things will add up. It is a beautiful haircut, confirmed. Yes. That's my new barber, the Jamaican guy. I don't know his name. I probably never will. But he's amateur. That's what I call him. I say in real estate, the end of a thing is better than its beginning. How you start doesn't define how it ends. So you cannot judge a project about how you start. Sometimes you have to start by acquiring the land. Sometimes it starts with a deposit. Who only judge it towards the end, whether your investments were good investments or they were bad investments. That is my reason. But in reality, we do it for wealth building. So real estate, people use property the world over to build wealth. You know, different things as a means to get credit, to hold, retain wealth against things like inflation, etc. So there's a pillar for wealth building. We'll explore that pillar, where I then come in as the lawyer. Here we're just discussing, and maybe the property specialist will then say, no, you were very wrong. Those are not the reasons why people invest in real estate, but for me, it's one of the pillars. The other is for posterity. We have people, obviously, that want to be remembered for a very long time, but in reality, unless you have Rockefeller money, you'll probably be forgotten in 20 years. But ultimately, everybody still needs to make an attempt. So for posterity, they invest in real estate so that the names are there and they are remembered. And obviously, if you look at the other definition of posterity, so that their progeny benefits from their work. So, two-tier. The other one would be matrimonial protection. Some people invest for matrimonial protection, and we'll talk how they invest in terms of matrimonial protection. And then the last is freedom, ownership, gratification. And I say this as a side note, it may be a bit offensive, to the people who live here. But we are quite free in Zimbabwe, in the sense that, except for next month, when my kids are at holiday, I don't really have to work. But next month, I know, after next month, my children go back to school, and I have to work to raise their school fees. But as I was speaking to people in the past week, and they were giving me these what are my stories about 25-year mortgages, which, thanks to our banks in Zimbabwe, we do not know of. And I was thinking, that means I have to report to myself for 25 years, and I can't stop working. So people like me invest for freedom, but some of you invest for personal gratification. And when we talk about ownership gratification, we are talking about stories that say, oh, I'm the first one in my family to own a property, so my name has to be on the title deed. There are different reasons why people do different things, but this is one of the reasons: freedom, and others for ownership gratification. So we're going to explore these things, and then as you select which way you want to secure your own legacy under these pillars, I will propose one or two ways you can do it. I'll try to be as layman as possible, and only my fellow counsel here would probably understand if I wasn't going to be. So if we're doing wealth building, one of the ways we can invest in property is through registering the properties under companies. Why would we do that? We are basically saying, we are realizing that these properties are more stock than they are long-term investments. And even if they are long-term investments, you are basically saying, I'm giving myself opportunities to dispose of this particular property under this structure. With company ownership, if the property is registered under a company in Zimbabwe, what you become are shareholders and directors of the company if you'd want. In an ideal situation, the directors, in law, the directors are the ones who are responsible for the running of the company. The shareholders have limited liability. So that's a protective mechanism. But if you were to ask me, I'll probably say things like, you know what, you take that property, you put it in one company, and then it does nothing except apply for credit or be a guarantor or co-principal debtor when you then apply for loans in the banks. But the company is there. You may have to do your returns yearly, but chances are there'll be nil returns. So it's minimal cost. I've put in some of the reasons. I'll be just speaking out of the blue, just from my mind when we're talking about registering in these companies. I propose normally that the company doesn't trade, but some people will trade with it. But the risk of trading is that then the assets that you're holding under the company, they become almost liable to the debts that you accrue. So let's say, for instance, you take a loan from somebody, and your properties are registered under different structures, etc., like companies. That means your loan doesn't ultimately follow you. Yes, you have lawyers like myself who then say, no, we'll pierce the corporate veil and do an application, etc., etc. Yes, the application can be done. But it is a difficult threshold to pass. So you're protected to an extent, and your loan doesn't follow that. You put this is bad advice, but you put your creditors in a position where they have to talk to you nicely. It's unfortunate, but they would have to, because they cannot attach that they're the things that you own. So that's company ownership. I'll explain that more in detail by diagrams, etc. I did mention that each company is to hold one asset, that you separate the trading company from the company that is holding the asset. And then if you are interested more in posterity, in securing the future of your progeny, then you invest in trusts. I mean, you create a trust, and then you register your properties under the trust. In that way, what you can do is you prescribe how you want your trust to be managed. Because we all, I don't know, the thing about being a parent, which I am, is that you cannot choose your children. And I've got one I was just called, he's lost his whole sunset, and I don't know where he's going, but so far the signs are not looking good. I don't know. So I just might have to protect myself and my assets, because he's not protecting his. So I cannot take it for granted that he's going to protect mine. So I know. So if I'm not saying anything bad, I'm supposed to say good things about it. I'm a father. But he doesn't have his front teeth. That's a fact. That's just a fact. So I would then put my stuff, because I'm very concerned about posterity. I'm concerned about my children. I'm concerned about my grandchildren when I have them, etc. And in my trust, I'll then prescribe how I want my things to be run. I'm from Zimbabwe. By saying I'm from Zimbabwe, I know most of you are from Zimbabwe, but we are really from Zimbabwe, isn't we? We're coming from Zimbabwe right now. And I've got 5 kids because I'm from Zimbabwe. So with these 5, God knows how they're going to turn out, etc. But I have put in my trust protective mechanisms, just in case they all turn out to be bizarre, and they go to their mother's side. Okay, they come to our side, whichever way they go. You have to then prescribe things that are personal to your family setting. I mean, I do not know your family council. I do not know anything that happens there. You know it. I do not know whether you've got brothers that want to take your things, I do not know if you're the first one to make it in your family. It's always a scary thing. And I always feel sorry for the people that were the first one to make it, because everybody's looking at your things.
Yeah, sure.
So it's not a good thing. But anyway, I'm not from that family, so let's leave that to that. So in terms of trust ownership, we're talking about asset protection. And it's protected in a manner that you have prescribed. I'm always against situations whereby people instruct their lawyers to draft a trust and then they do not participate in that trust, because what you end up having is a Madzima trust, which protects the Madzima people, and there's got nothing to do with any Nyasemas, it's got nothing to do with anybody. And then when a situation does arise, that's when you realize that it is better if you were Madzima, and the trust does not work towards what you wanted it to work towards. So you should always be able to participate in that process. So the other benefits that come from that is obviously you've got tax efficiency. You don't pay estate duty because the property will always be in the trust when you die. It doesn't become a part of your personal estate. Although things like capital gains tax, etc., are also charged on the trust. And your conditions of sale can be prescribed by the trust. In terms of conditions of sale, I'll tell you a true story. There was a gentleman that was living here. He's a friend, so it's not a client. It's almost like the Chinimbi matter. His mother fell ill. He came to Zimbabwe. And they were two in their family. And unfortunately, the mother passed away. He's a friend. And then he started selling off everything. I mean, the parties were nice, though I attended some of the parties. They were good. But, I mean, we were celebrating the mother's work in a roundabout way, if you want to look at it from that perspective. But they were movables. So you sold off all the movables, literally, from the business and the houses. The mother had done exceptionally well in her lifetime. But then came to the immovables. The immovables were registered under a trust. And the terms of the trust was that he was supposed to consult with his sibling. The sibling turned out to be like the other parent because the sibling was not having it. And up to today, my friend lives off rentals from the mother's houses because we did not party the mother's houses away. That's one of those situations where the trust then takes care of your issues after the fact. So, in a situation where you want to then combine wealth building and posterity, I just did a small diagram. You have to understand, I don't come from the background where we draw a lot of diagrams, etc. But at the top you will have the trust, which owns 100% of the holding company. So the shares of the trust, whatever it is called, would own 100% of the holding company. The holding company ultimately will own 100% of company one, which only owns property one and doesn't own anything else. The second company will be owned 100% by the holding company, which owns property two and doesn't own anything else. Same with third company, property three doesn't own anything else, and the fourth company can be the operating company, where you actually do your business from. So the operating company is owned 100%. Your biggest handicap or headache will be the operating company, because the operating company is going to create debt and problems. And you do not want that operating company to follow you. And when you want to deal with issues like you want to raise money, etc., you can actually get resolutions that one of those companies will guarantee the debt and then they put up the property. So each property is dealt with by its own. I was at one time in life, I actually was a CEO of a company where we had two, an operating company and an asset holding company. But in there we had all the assets in there, ultimately. And as a CEO of a company operating in Zimbabwe, we went into corporate rescue, then liquidation, the normal stuff. But the assets of the companies were protected under a different structure. And obviously, the things that to negotiate, the schemes of arrangement, etc., where the creditors were paid off things. So when you're looking at securing or getting into the business of real estate, you have to start thinking along these lines. And this is critical. A lot of people then say to themselves, I do not have capacities to be investing in this way. As a young lawyer, first thing I did was create a trust. I had no assets. And my life has been easier ever since, because now all I had to do was to put whatever I had created into this trust or under different structures without necessarily having to go through the cost of then transferring what I purchased before into these structures. I like the cheaper, easier way of doing things. So this is one of the ways. And this is targeted mainly to people who are looking for wealth building in real estate and posterity. Then we talk about matrimonial protection, and this is critical. In terms of matrimonial protection in Zimbabwe, the first part is that all our marriages are out of community of property. And because they are, it follows that people own what they own individually and they do not own it communally or as a couple when the marriage subsists. And in the event that the marriage breaks or there's divorce summonses, the property for the short term becomes, well, it's not really owned by either in that period when we're going through the court process. But at the very end of it, what the judge will consider is the contribution. It's not a clear-cut 50% situation as you have it in other jurisdictions. We talk about the contributions that you made towards the purchase. That is what is then calculated. So contributions obviously like homemaking and then school runs, etc. and cooking. Is that bad? Those are contributions that are considered because it's a very big contribution. They are considered, but they are not considered from the 50-50 perspective. So it may come up to 20%. It may be 25%. If you had 2 maids and a gardener and a driver, then maybe it can be 10%. I mean, honestly, and then a chef, this should be 5%. Honestly, I don't know which judge will give more than 5%, but if he does, he does. But it's a contribution, so school in the morning, get the kids ready. There was a maid that got the kids ready, and the maid that cooked for the kids, and then there was a chef, and then the driver was waiting outside. Yeah, let's weigh your contribution here. Maybe 5%. So normally what people then do is they joint ownership of the property is a matrimonial protection mechanism. Because if all our properties are out of community of property, that means your 50% of that property is owned outside of that marriage, and so is the other 50%. So that helps. Only problem is, on sale, joint owners have to agree and sign together, which is a big problem. And why I say this, I know of a couple, they're quite big in Zimbabwean real estate, and the agents may know these people. I just don't know if they know the story of these people, so I will not mention their names. They basically bought a house somewhere around maybe middle density. Maybe we can call it lower middle density in Zimbabwe. The man and the woman had a knack of sprucing up properties. They basically spruced their properties up towards Borotobrook, where they eventually ended up in. And obviously, the first days after having done up the property, there was then that fight that somebody else is attached to the property and the other is thinking economically about the property. And since this country is very sensitive to issues of sex and which person it is, I will not say it. If I was in Zimbabwe, I would say who was very attached and who was thinking about the money. But now I won't. I'll just let you guys assume who it was. But there was one who was, and the other, I'm just saying, I won't say it. I need to go back to Zim. So apparently, eventually, the other partner caught on to it 3-4 houses later, and they started doing it for fun. And the person considered his properties as stocks. He never looked at them from, with affection, from a home eye. He looked at it from an economic eye. how much value can I add here so I can sell? But they finally made it to where they were going. But if you have this kind of setup, and the other partner who's affectionate, about these things, and gets attached and thinks about the history, that how the children, had themselves at that property, and the memories, and all sorts of strange things. You may get to 90 still living in the same house. I don't know, because they won't sign the other part, and you can't move. So that will be the handicap, if you are looking at it from that perspective. But if you are looking at protection, then it's one way of looking at it. A joint owner is capable of selling and transferring their individual interest. This is a serious problem, which means ultimately you can just end up with me as your partner in that house. And since our house is ownership in Zimbabwe of a property, we call it undivided, because as long as there's no permit dividing the house saying this side belongs to you, this side belongs to me, it ultimately means this bedroom belongs to me and you. The kitchen, I say it with emphasis, the kitchen belongs to both of us. And the lounge, the garden, the toilet. So if I end up owning the house with you, you cannot tell me that I can't sleep in the bedroom. I mean, we own it together. So that's the other handicap. So I really hope there will not be a situation where you end up owning it with myself. Also, a joint owner cannot be forced to sell their interest. Well, that's partially true, because in the end, under extreme circumstances, you can request the court to force them to sell it. But obviously it's a question of the judge weighing whether or not your proposition makes sense and requires and empowers the court to affect your ownership rights. The courts are reluctant, but this has happened before. That's joint ownership. And the last one we talk about is personal gratification. I put freedom on the side because I'm not going to talk about freedom as much as I spoke about in the beginning. Here, this is obviously where you own the property. Main thing is the property becomes a part of your estate. When you have debts, people can attach lawyers. It's easy for us to identify who owns the property, and once we do, we can attach the property after having taken away your movables. Us as a firm, personally, we enjoy attaching in December just before Christmas. Somehow it's got more results than than the other times. You just wait until the invitations for the Christmas parties go out, and then you come and you take all the sofas. And then after that, the visitors are going to sit on the floor. Somehow, for some weird reason, money starts to come out for some strange reason. We have found that to be very useful. And for those who collect debts, I think you should use that method. Christmas, Easter, big holidays. And then the benefits, obviously, of having the property in your name is that you benefit from some tax exemptions. Or if there's transfer between spouses, you get exempted. I've never really found a non-criminal reason for transfer between spouses. But it happens. And since property is owned out of community of the marriage, that means it can be protected by that transfer. But anyway, every time you see this, there's something going on. And then obviously you have, if you're selling your principal private residence and you're above 55, you're exempt for capital gains tax. By principal private residence, we mean the residence where you actually live, where your bills come, etc. But we have seen people then who look for the most expensive property and then call it their principal private residence. I've spoke about most of the things that come on this one. So now we go back to the estate and consequences on death. What happens? And here we're going to talk about the property that is actually registered in your name. The other ones, they do not form a part of that because they are not owned by you. So we are just limited to that particular property. Nobody likes to talk about this particular topic. I promise you, I made so much money with this topic in 2000. That COVID thing should come back. No? Okay, a lot of people came. Everybody was talking about death. I'm sorry. I did make a lot of money in 2000. Everybody wanted to sort out their estate. But these are the consequences on when you die and an executor is appointed. And it is preferable when you die that you die with a will. And then in your will, you then appoint your executor. Your executor, not your executor. Your executor is the guy who probably killed you. The executor is the guy who takes care of the estate after you die. It's very critical that you select your executor properly, because the executor is ultimately the person who's going to be responsible for your estate. The law obviously has put in safeguards, fiduciary responsibility, big words, to make sure that the executors act properly. But they start off as human beings before they are clothed with this title. So the executor must then be interested in ensuring that your estate is wound up in a manner that would be to your wishes. And I've had one estate, funny estate, where the gentleman was given, the gentleman had cancer, so he had a lot of time to think about how his things should be managed. And he appointed me de facto the executor of that estate. And told me point blank, this brother is going to do this, that person is going to do that. I couldn't believe what was happening. Everybody did what he said they would do. Everybody. This guy is going to come, he's going to be the nice, he's the one that's going to be sent as the goodie. Don't trust him. He's going to be nice to you, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. Only two things that he missed was that 3 of his friends came to make claims on that property. Out of debts they couldn't prove, there was nothing there, and one of the 2 friends first came and inquired in a nice way, obviously, oh my God, this has happened. What did he really have? I thought, wow, that's a very strange question. That since he's shown me the time, since we're still crying, we need to know what this guy had. But I didn't answer that because of the privilege side of things. But then people started making strange claims to that estate. So he missed 1 or 2 people, but the majority of the people, he was point on. So I'm going to rush through the remaining so that at least I deal with time. So if there's no will, ultimately, the law prescribes how the estate should be distributed. Priority is spouse and children. On spouse and children, I think I wrote about this a week or 2 weeks ago, where we have another case where a young spouse, where a man in the latter years of his life decided to finally leave, and then married a very beautiful young woman who had her own daughter, and they didn't share a child. I saw the woman because I was representing her. She was beautiful. So I don't really blame this guy. And only problem I had was really his ex-wife had like 5 children, and everybody seemed to live off this farm. It had title deeds, etc., etc. And what we argued and won on was that she was the surviving spouse. But what it meant in reality was we had to transfer the title deed to her. And when she died, it had to go to a daughter who wasn't his. and that whole estate had gone. That is the reality of a no-will situation. And I do not think in my mind that that's what the men expected would happen. I do not think so. But the law is stubborn and fair. It's not moral. The law is fair. When the law talks about spouse and children, it doesn't necessarily. So if the spouse is a high priority in a matrimonial home, she's the one who gets it, whether she has your children or not. That's what happened. There are other benefits there that I'll just skip. Also, in terms of a will, you could give use of fractional rights. This is a situation, obviously, where you then appoint, if you've got a spouse, and you want to actually leave the property to your son, you protect her rights by basically saying, until she dies or gets remarried. That's a good one. Then the property belongs to her. You choose how you want to frame it. It's ultimately yours. So that way, if the kids become delinquents, they will not chase their mother or father from the house. So it's a useful way to do it. I'll skip through most of this, and then maybe marital consequences. We spoke a bit about it. I'll just skip through it, and I'll skip through this one so I can finish. In terms of ownership, it's good to ensure that there are title deeds, and so that title deeds are registered against the world. Complete protection in these title deeds. Session is your local council or developer sessions. Most of these guys will probably give you sessions if the development is still ongoing. Protects you, but it's important that your relationship is directly with the developer or the local council. It's very critical. It cannot be through patience, the estate agent. You must request that you speak to the developer. I'll skip through these ones. And then I think the last thing I'll talk about, the current opportunities that are there. In Zim, we have the farm title deeds that are coming up, the land policy. It's an opportunity, especially for the diaspora market. I say this intentionally because obviously when the land reform happened, some of you, even myself, were not in Zimbabwe and were not beneficiaries of that policy. And some beneficiaries maybe do not enjoy farming. So there's an opportunity to purchase the land that is still coming as an opportunity. Structurally, the ministry hasn't finished as far as our consultations have gone on how it's going to happen. But once it's in a title deed, I actually suspect that all you have to get is a certificate of no present interest and you'll be able to transfer. So you have an opportunity to raise your capital. And then prior on that, in this particular situation, when eventually the lawyers in Zimbabwe figure out how we're going to do it, and we see the terms that will come out on the title deeds, which I suspect will have restrictive covenants, almost similar to the ones that were on the previous farm title deeds. People can be able to purchase, and that market is going to be open for 6 months or so to a year before the prices start going berserk. Why I say before the prices start going berserk, because if I buy and I'm not the one who's selling, it is at a profit. That is for sure. So obviously the opportunity will be the first time in. And we also know that there's now the urban policy. I hope the other presenters are going to speak a lot on this one. It just came up about 2 weeks or a week and a half ago. It was published by the president. I know our office is still trying to study it and its effect on things like densification, etc. So I will not be able to present a lot about it, but it's happening now and it affects your investment. But anyway, the overarching objective of this policy is to ensure that there is better development within the country. So it's beneficial as far as we are aware. But I do not have the details. My time is up. Thank you very much.
Wow. Thank you so much. I think that's what us young people call free game. Lots of free information. I won't ask you what your hourly rate is, because I don't think most of us can afford it, but that was so much value. Thank you so much.